So yeah, thank you, Joe, and thanks to the MGLP for hosting this webinar. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to folks about this project. So yes, my name is Erin Fuller. I work for the Van Buren Conservation District in Southwest Michigan, doing a whole variety of projects, but I really am excited about inland lake conservation and protection. And so this was a really fun project to work on. I coordinated the creation of Shoreline Living issues 1 and 2, and with a team of folks. Of course, it always takes a lot of people to put a project like this together. And so we're excited to get to share with everybody today some of the work that we did, and I'm excited to have 2 of the landowners that we featured in this second edition be able to join us today. So here is what we're talking about today. This is issue 2 of Shoreline Living magazine. The idea with this, I know there's probably a variety of folks that are joining us today. So whether you're a landowner or if you're practicing, if you work for your State Department of Natural Resources, or you work for a soil and water conservation district, or any of those types of organizations, then I'm hoping that there will be something useful for you and your outreach and education efforts in this magazine. Or again, if you are a landowner and want some inspiration and ideas. Our thought with this magazine is that there is quite a bit of information out there to help people do the nuts and bolts of shoreline protection and restoration projects. But there was a little bit of a gap of sort of inspirational material, materials that would get people excited to do inland lake conservation and restoration projects. And so we wanted to have sort of some storytelling, some prettier graphics available to people. And we were thinking sort of like a Martha Stewart Living magazine, a Better Homes and Gardens style magazine that just would have some good quality information, but also inspiring stories and beautiful pictures of inland lake shorelines. And so that's what we've done here. And this is our second edition. Our first edition looks like this. It's probably backwards, but there is a first edition as well. So now we have two issues worth of material available for folks to look through and, like I said, inspire you and inspire folks that you may work with. Here's just a glimpse at what the inside looks like. So that we have a variety of articles. There's an introduction, and then we have five landowners that we highlighted inside. And our goals were just to show those real world examples of natural shoreline, so we can show people what they look like, how beautiful they can be, how effective they can be at, preventing shoreline erosion, providing wildlife habitat, those kinds of things. So we wanted to show a real diversity of sites. We didn't want every spot to look exactly the same, because there's a whole world out there of ways that an inland lake can look. And so we wanted to show that range of examples. We wanted to promote the use of native plants, of course. That's something that's really important on our inland lakes. And so we wanted to show examples so people could see that. And of course, our end goal is to increase the conservation of natural shorelines. So whether we're restoring existing shorelines or protecting existing natural shorelines, just showing that whole range of what a project can look like, from, a very built up lake with lots of mowed grass down to the waterfront, all the way to a much wilder setting. So we can show people the whole range of what you can see out there, and hopefully find something that would connect with just about everybody, no matter what kind of a lake they might live on. And probably if you've tuned in today, you know that natural shorelines are important, but just when we were talking about this project, these were some of the things that we had in the front of our mind, that why a natural shoreline is so important is because it is that complex ecosystem that supports wildlife, it supports, the fishery, protects the quality of the water that's important for all of us who love our inland lakes, whether it's for boating or fishing or swimming or whatever that might be. Just that idea that the more of a lake's shoreline that's natural, the better for habitat, better for water quality. And that the more of that native natural vegetation along the shoreline, the better that can capture runoff, prevent shoreline erosion, reduce sedimentation of the lake. So those are just some of the core things that we were trying to show folks, but again, through storytelling, through really connecting with people's love of their lake. The highlights, we interviewed 9 different landowners and created 9 different articles for this second phase, for the second issue. We wanted some geographic diversity, and so we have 4 different states represented: South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. There are 5 articles in the magazine. Like you see up top, we have 9 articles. We ended up deciding that 9 articles was maybe too much information for one magazine. So we pared it down to 5 articles in the magazine, but then those 4 additional articles, they will be available in a variety of different ways that we're still working out. We may end up publishing a 3rd edition. Those will be available to share with lake associations, other organizations, their newsletters. There's talk of a story map, just a whole variety of other information that we might end up using this material for. So here are a few examples of some of the folks that are featured in this second edition. Just again, a wide range of property types and families. We have a duck hunting conservation project from Minnesota. We have a multi-generational conservation story from Wisconsin. We have someone who is really working to improve the fishery with the addition of woody habitat. And you can see that he's sitting there on his woody habitat in the lower right-hand corner there, and has seen a really marked increase in the fishery quality on that lake. So again, just trying to capture as wide a variety as possible of the different stories that we might see on an inland lake. And if you would like to get your hands on copies of either first or second issue of the Shoreline Living magazine, digital copies are available for free. It looks like Joe dropped the link into the chat. Thank you, Joe. So free digital copies are downloadable, and you could also download pictures, additional material that you're working on that you need graphics for. All of the photos that were taken as part of this project are available for use for free, as long as it's, educational and promoting natural shorelines. We'd love to see the material get out there. So when you go to the Midwest Glacial Lakes website that Joe linked there, this is what the buttons will look like. So the 2 red arrows there are how you get either digital copies or download pictures. And then if you want hard copies, those are available on the bookstore for the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And you can get there again from the Midwest Glacial Lakes website, clicking that far left Order Shoreline Living Booklets button. If you click that, it takes you right to that Stevens Point website. And here's what that looks like. You can order those printed copies, either 1 copy, which is $3 a pop, or you can get a pack of 25, or you can get a pack of 125. And the more you get, the cheaper they are per copy. And the costs here are really just to cover shipping and some of the reprinting if we need to order more, if we need to print more. So I hope that those are valuable to all of you folks, that you're able to make use of them, and that they're either inspirational for yourself as an inland lake landowner, or that you can use them in your work to promote natural shorelines. I have to just quickly thank the folks that made this project as beautiful as it is. We had a professional photographer, designer, and writer do that work. So it wasn't me as a biologist trying to take photos or tell stories. And that was really important to us to really capture the heart of the stories, to have professionals do this work. So thanks to Mark, Kat, and Tom. They did really, really beautiful work to make this an excellent project. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Richard and Mary Gallea. They are one of the featured families in this issue on Great Northern Lake in Minnesota. And Mary is actually our cover girl, so we're very honored to have her here today, and Richard as well. And so I am going to turn it on over to them. Thanks, Richard and Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really are pleased to be able to, first of all, to be asked to participate in this Shoreline Living magazine. I think we were referred to by a contact in our county government a year or two ago, and we're always very pleased to be able to share our experience with converting what was pretty much a golf course style shoreline into something very different. We can move to the next slide, Erin. So this is all or most of the article on our parcel that was published in the second edition. I obviously won't go through all the verbiage here. And in fact, these are relatively recent photos from a year or two ago, but in preparing for today's webinar, we were able to go dig up some photos that we took when we embarked on this lakescaping project 17 years ago, coming up this summer. And so if we switch to the next slide, this gives you a sense of what the place we bought looked like when we got it almost 20 years ago. It was put up in the late 60s by a Korean war vet, and there's a little over an acre on the lake shore, as well as about an acre that we bought across the street. And the guy mowed literally almost every square foot of it. And for us, this was a weekend cabin at the time. We have since retired and transformed the cabin into a full-time home. But with us coming up on weekends, with our hectic schedules, I said to the guy, how much time do you spend mowing? And I think it was about 8 hours. And that was just completely unrealistic. But for initially, at least for the first year or two, we trudged through, and we did mow a parcel to the west. We did not mow across the street, but as you could see, we did maintain a manicured lawn pretty much down to the shoreline. And there was a riprap wall that was installed just the year before we bought it. But what happened is, if you switch to the next slide, I think, that railroad retaining wall that you see up there was failing. It had been probably put up in the late 60s. And big chunks of it would fall out as I'd bump it with the mower. So what we decided to do was seek approval to replace that retaining wall. And I'll have Mary kind of describe the process that we went through at that time.
Thank you, Richard. So basically what I had to do is go to a meeting and appear before the county and get permission, or a permit actually, to replace the retaining wall. And I guess at the time we didn't really think of any other options. And at this meeting, there was a representative from the Soil and Water Conservation that suggested or asked if we'd ever thought of doing a native lakescape or landscape. And we're like, no, we really didn't. So we talked about it and decided that it was probably a really good thing to do. Not only would it eliminate all that mowing, it would also create a great habitat. And we were really attracted to the idea of a native lakescape. So we decided to do it.
And spent pretty much an entire winter developing a plan with the Soil and Water Conservation planners, looking over lists of hundreds of different species, and it was really a lot of fun, and we got very excited about it as it came, time in the spring and summer to execute.
So yeah, we did have control of the plants that we planted, and it was broken out in categories of lake, upland, wildflowers, grasses, trees, and so we really had carte blanche to select what we wanted to do on our property. Not only did we develop the lake shore, but we also developed, we have a prairie, upland prairie on the other side of our home. So you can go to the next slide and I'll explain the process. So basically, as you can see on the copy on the slide, we had to remove the turf and we regraded it. And they added an erosion blanket, a little netting erosion blanket. So, you know, because when you first plant, you don't really have the benefits of not having it erode. So that was where we started. Next slide, please. The first steps we did then was put in a walkway, steps in a walkway from our cabin that took us down to the lake. And so we used a boulder. We did a little boulder retaining wall above and below. We call it the catwalk. And then we had the plantings were above and below it as well. Next slide. So basically the concept for the lake, just to kind of facilitate a quicker growth, was we put plugs in on the shoreline. And we actually did seeding on the other side of the property because it was a little bit longer process. But we were able to plant plugs, and like we had 18 by 18 foot squares, and we planted plugs. I think we did some seeding.
It was pretty much all plugs in front of the cabin, but given that we expanded the scope of the project to this parcel to the west, creating 300 and some feet of lakeshore that went completely native, the cost was prohibitive to do that all with plugs. And so we mutually agreed to seed, you know, the larger parcel to the west. And all of this, by the way, was subject to 75% subsidy by state funds that the county had access to. And by far the biggest expense in this project was removing the railroad tie retaining wall, which due to the presence of creosote cannot be landfilled and has to be incinerated. So between the disposition of that retaining wall, the regrading and all of the plantings, the cost was roughly, I think, $25,000 17 years ago. And we 75% of that cost was covered by funds from the state of Minnesota, leaving our contribution to be a little bit less than $6,000.
Which is a great incentive for doing it as well, to have that support. Next slide, please. So this just kind of shows the buffer zone a few weeks after planting. And basically what you need to do as a homeowner is, you know, responsible for irrigating it initially to get that growth started. But if you are considering doing a lakescape plan like this, please avoid overwatering. We got pretty zealous about making sure, and unfortunately, too much water, you will propagate some weeds. It's not weed free. It's not grow and, you know, and leave. You really do have to maintain it. And so we did work with a native company to come in and help manage the weeds for probably the first couple of years.
The hardest part is that when these, you know, the native plantings are so young and immature, it's hard to discern between, you know, young weeds in the spring and desirable plants. We have learned a lot about it, and now it's much less of an issue because the native plantings have largely asserted themselves and crowded out the weeds. But early on, as Mary mentioned, due to our getting a little carried away, and we can irrigate with free lake water, and we got a little nuts. And we do encourage now people that come by and talk to us about it to really warn them to only irrigate enough to kickstart things, and then by virtue of native plants being resilient, you know, let them do their thing and prevail against the weeds.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Next slide.
So this is a shot that was taken about 2 years after the project. And as you see from some of the other photos in the magazine article, things have evolved quite a bit since this picture was taken. That little sandy beach doesn't exist anymore.
Nope.
There's nothing left to mow. In fact, part of the lakeshore to the west, which was all just planted with wildflowers and grasses, has now been completely turned over into a kind of a little mini forest along the shoreline. We had left the country for a few years in the early 2010s, and nature abhors a vacuum. So while we were gone, all sorts of things asserted themselves. But for the most part, it's now the wildflowers and grasses that you see here, as well as a fully developed prairie in the land to the west. Next slide. This is a photo that was taken quite recently, I think late last year. And one of the things we emphasize when we talk to homeowners that are thinking about this is that it's not an either or proposition. To embrace a native buffer zone and to do some lakescaping doesn't mean that you have to completely forsake, a little bit of a mowed lawn. And this shot is taken kind of from the roadway looking back towards the lake. And we do have a little patch of grass. It takes me maybe 40 minutes a time to mow it, and relative to a couple acres of land. And so the two things, the parcels can coexist. And even through the prairie, which gets to be pretty tall, in July, August, we do mow pathways through it, which facilitates our ability and visitors to be able to walk through and more closely examine the flowers and the native, the bees and the dragonflies and all the other wildlife. So there is a happy medium, I guess, is our point, where you don't have to just have strictly a mowed lawn or strictly, a wild prairie. There you can have both.
And we have this is our formal gardens, and then on the other side of the house, we have the native prairie and a big vegetable garden. So we kind of do it all.
We do. And it's really become a passion for us now. We've become rather evangelical about all this. I recently rejoined the Lake Association Board of Directors, and I'm the land use guy. So I'm the one that's the advocate for the Lake Steward program, which is something being advocated within the state of Minnesota. Homeowners can take a quiz, and if they qualify as lake stewards, they get a cool sign they can put out on their dock. And through this, we've actually sponsored Greyhound bus loads of people who have come by on tours that the county sponsors. We're doing it again this August, and as a way to, kind of try and change the hearts and minds of people. Unfortunately, to a lot of people, an ideal shoreline property is, mowed grass right to the shoreline, and you're never going to change everybody's mind, but, every little bit helps, and that's sort of what we're after. Next slide. These last two slides are just shots from either the magazine or outtakes, I think, that kind of give you a sense of what some of our property looks like. Mary had the pollinator sign made, which is kind of fun. I mean, when the Monarda, the bee balm, matures in July, it's just amazing. I mean, we get literally thousands of bees that come, and it's just a joy to be around them. And then I think the last slide. Just another couple shots. So that's pretty much it. That's our story, and
we're sticking to it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Richard and Mary. I think this is just such an inspiring story, that those before to after photos are so cool. Just what a transformation. So thank you for sharing your story here with us and in the magazine. And I love the Greyhound bus loads of people that are learning from you and hearing the story. And this is just, exactly what we were hoping to capture with this magazine, is these inspiring stories that show what you can do on what was once just mowed grass, and what amazing habitat you've created, and how good for the lake that is. So thank you so much.
And we won't hold Joe responsible for placing us in South Dakota at the outset.
Oops.
Oops, that's all right.
It's our neighbor, but we are in Minnesota. So.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you, Richard and Mary.
Thank you.
Next, we have, if I can get my slides working, there we go. We have Nate Fuller, who is going to talk about a project on Dugout Lake in Wisconsin. And just full disclosure, Nate and I are related. He's my husband. When we first started talking about the second edition of Shoreline Living we've talked about wanting to highlight a conservation easement. And at that moment, Nate's family was starting to talk about a conservation easement on their family property. So I said, I think I know a family that might be willing, and they have a great family story, a great conservation ethic. And so they fit well into the magazine. But with no further ado, I will pass it on over to Nate.
Thank you, Mrs. Fuller. I'm excited to share the story of my family. Erin and I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but I grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and my great grandmother, when she lived in the Chicago area in the suburbs, that was actually farm country back then, and she bought land up in far northern Wisconsin to escape the hay fever. At that time, Glenview, Illinois was farm country and just a stop on the train stop. So she, her brother worked for the train company, so they took the train about as far north as they could, found a good stop along the way, and found some family land to start. And that was back in the late 1920s that happened. And since then, the property has stayed in family hands. And so this is a story not just about my immediate family, who is pictured. Well, my sister and her family didn't quite make it up the year of the photos there, but my father's actually one of 7 siblings. And so this was a project that was coordinated amongst 7 branches of family, which meant that it actually took many, many years for us to sort this out. Next slide. But we were all very excited to have our story be told and shared in hopes that it might promote other conservation. Both Erin and I have worked in conservation for over 20 years, but we're not outliers in our family. My father worked for EPA. I've got a brother who works for the Nature Conservancy. I've got a cousin who's a biologist out in California. I've got other cousins working in sustainability and electric vehicles and other sciences. And those who aren't doing that, most of them are teachers teaching conservation ecology and such. It's a strong family ethic, and I think it's no coincidence that we have this this property that has inspired us through many, many generations. In fact, my father, he's getting ready to celebrate his 83rd birthday, and it was really important to him that we get this easement done, and while he still could be around to help guide it. When we were quoted for the story, actually the land trust we worked with ran a story about us, and to quote him, he said, "Beyond offering this gift to our family, there's a benefit to the community, the wildlife, the ecology. We are here for a purpose, and one of them is to do something for the public good." And that's a strong ethic that runs throughout my family, that there is charity and good works for our community is really important to us. So while we love our land intensely, and it's an anchor point for us, it was important for us to do this for the broader good for the wildlife of northern Wisconsin, as well as for generations to come, to have wild natural areas. Next slide. So I mentioned my family's interest in the property started in the late 1920s, early 1930s. At that point, much of Wisconsin was still relatively young forest, and it was an escape for the family from life in Chicago. And as generations went on, that continued to be the case, but change happens, right? We started feeling a little bit more like an island as change was happening more rapidly around the Hazelhurst-Minocqua region of northern Wisconsin. We had property sell to the north of us, and the new landowner immediately ordered a clear cut of the property. there. To the south of us, what had always been couple residential cabins got converted into a development called Dugout Lake Vista Estates, which was really quite alarming because my family had always considered Dugout Lake our special retreat, and to have a resort community named after our retreat felt very much like there was a community of peeping Toms moving in. And I should mention Dugout Lake gets its name from a dugout canoe. Early canoes were found and used as the main travel source by the indigenous peoples at the time, and they occasionally would sink them and store them underwater at times. And our little lake had one of those in there and got the name Dugout Lake from there. But as you can see, 80 years, the forest community, the bogs, and the lake stay largely unchanged. Next slide. And it was an important part of my childhood and my father's childhood and his father and my son's childhood, or just growing up in adulthood, to have a wild place to explore. We left mostly footprints and occasionally footbridges to explore our land. The land we own is roughly 160 acres. Dugout Lake itself is about 24 acres in size, depending on water levels and whether you count bogs as part of the lake or not. But it was very much a place of inspiration to explore and be, and the main rule was whatever we were going to do, you shouldn't be able to see it from the lake. The idea was that we would keep a dock and be able to go out in a boat, but even the family cabin, you should not be able to see that from the shoreline. It was just part of our land ethic from the beginning, that the lake itself was, in a sense, its own sacred space and wanted it to be wild. It's where we enjoyed the loons, the eagles, and where we go fishing. Next slide. But that's not to say we don't use the property. It's where our family gathers to connect. It's where we build our connections. And so it is a property we use. We do have some level of impact. We do the kayaking, paddling, swimming, fishing, and have our little cabin tucked up on the hillside, and where we can do our family. But we got concerned now as we were looking at now 5 generations into being on the land, that change was inevitable. And there was question about how can we memorialize the land ethic, particularly my grandfather, my father's father, had passionate views about the family being stewards of this natural area, that we were responsible for caring for it. And we gathered at my grandmother's 100th birthday, all the family members. And again, so this is, over 12, 14 brothers and sisters, and then their kids, my generation numbers over 25. And then you add spouses, we're getting over 40. People, so we had a large gathering at this meeting, probably of 30, 40 people, and talked about the land ethic that my grandfather had inspired upon us. And with that many people, you get a wide variety of opinions and ideas, and we range the full spectrum of every political type from far left to far right. But the one thing we all agreed on was that in memorializing that land ethic, that we could all come around the idea that this land deserved to be protected in perpetuity. And that's when we proposed the idea of a conservation easement and trying to find a partner who could do that with us. Next slide. Because really, this is one of my favorite drone shots of our family lake. This bit of wilderness has inspired our family, and we talk about how our family tree has roots in Dugout Lake. It's what brings us all together on any sort of holiday gathering. If things start getting a little contentious and political, you just have to bring up Dugout Lake and everything gets smoothed on over, and we're all friends again. Next slide. So the process of putting a conservation easement, I was very familiar with because I'd actually worked for a land trust for over 15 years at the point, and was happy to work with. We found a land trust, Northwoods Land Trust, that works in several counties of far northern Wisconsin. There are land trusts throughout the nation. So wherever you are, there's a land trust who's able to work with you. If you want to find one, you just at the bottom of the slide there, you'll see the Land Trust Alliance. That's the governing body that accredits land trusts. So if you go to the landtrustalliance.org, there's a header right at the top up there, find a land trust, and they'll list them there for you. You can find who to work with. And the idea of a conservation easement is that we use the term negotiate the conservation easement, but really it's more about a collaboration, about where you meet with the organization and you talk about the conservation values of property, of what is special about that land and what values does the land trust have that they're trying to protect, but then what are the values of your family or yourself personally of land you want to protect, and where do they meet up, and can you generate a legal document that will protect those conservation values in perpetuity. And a large part, if you hit the button, next button, Erin, the chunk of our property, about 115 acres of it, is basically just wild woodlands that we wanted to keep relatively wild. We do practice sustainable forestry from time to time. That's a good way to stir up some arguments amongst the family. But the fact is that there is a place for sustainable forestry. And the easement that we negotiated with the Northwoods Land Trust allows sustainable forestry. The things that we all agreed upon we didn't want to see in that wild along the shoreline and the forested areas was development and subdivision. A good portion of lakes, it's hard to find a lake in the Northwoods of Wisconsin or Minnesota or any inland lakes these days, anywhere in the Midwest, that hasn't been chopped up into small subdivisions with lots of slices down to the lake, and the lakes suffer for that. And so Northwoods Land Trust was really excited to work with us because our family controls or owns over 90% of the shoreline of Dugout Lake. There's just a 200-foot stretch a neighboring property owner has. And so when we were negotiating how to best protect the lake, we actually identified what you see on the sign. This parcel D is a small piece of property we left outside of the easement that we can do with a land swap with the neighbor, if we ever can convince them to go along with it, so that we could gain the last control of the last 200 feet of Dugout Lake. We also left out parcel C out of our easement so that if the family ever fell in hard times and had to sell a portion of the property just to keep the greater piece of the property, we would have that option. And everyone's hope is that one of my cousins makes it rich and is willing to buy that piece of property from the family and keep it in the family and do something modest over there, a modest cabin, but make it financially feasible for the broader family to keep being able to come to Dugout Lake. And then the trickiest part always with an easement is where we're going to have the heavier footprint, and that's parcel B. So Erin, if you hit next. And that's where our building envelope is. As I mentioned, we like to leave just a few footprints and occasional footbridges on most of the property, but when you've got so many family branches and expanding generations out there, we do leave a little more than footprints, and we do like to be able to enjoy the property. And so we negotiated how to keep any impact we have very isolated. So we've mapped out all the existing buildings and such, and have negotiated the ability to add a few buildings. Erin, if you could hit next on there, and additional dock or two. So we can add a second cabin, and things are limited by just how many thousands of square feet of impervious surface are allowed. Because one of the drivers for Northwoods Land Trust and for my family was protecting the water quality of Dugout Lake. And for that, a lot of the concern about any development was really about impervious surface. How much increased runoff could we have? So even discussions of driveway types and scales and location were all being discussed. And again, it was a collaboration much more than a negotiation about how do we protect the quality of Dugout Lake, but still allow my family to grow and expand in our generations, but still use the land sustainably. Next. And so that really is our perspective of the conservation easement about why we wanted to protect Dugout Lake, is this wild area, the inspiration that's bringing in from generations to generations. Excited that, you know, my mother and father there on the left inspired me and my brothers and sisters, and that same inspiration is Erin and I are sharing with our son Theo there, who I remember growing when he was little, his greatest compliment he could ever give anything was, "I love it almost as much as the cabin in Dugout Lake." And that's the standard amongst our family, is does it measure up to how much we love our land up in northern Wisconsin? And that was our greatest way we felt we could memorialize that land ethic that my grandfather and great grandmother inspired in all of us, was the conservation easement. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks for sharing that story. That I know that story well, but I appreciate you sharing it with the rest of these folks. And again, just an inspiring story, multi-generational tale of people coming together for conservation and to protect inland lakes across the upper Midwest. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. I did want to close just with some credits. This project was made possible, of course, by the Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership through funding from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the Sport Fish and Wildlife Restoration Programs of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And huge thanks to the publication team, a couple of them who are on here today, Joe Noner, Eric Elgin, and Julia Kirkwood. And the link that is there at the bottom, again, to get access to this document and the materials related to it. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, just watershed@vanburencd.org. So with that, I think we will switch over to questions. Joe, do you have a list of questions for us?
As always. Yes. Well, thank you guys. I think those were really wonderful. You teed up the Shoreline Living documents really well. And then two really good examples of, ways to rehabilitate shorelines and protect shorelines, and really compelling to me personally, and I'm sure to the folks that are listening. So yes, I do have questions from the audience, and I'll take this opportunity to just remind folks, if you have questions, please use the question and answer function to submit them. And again, you can do that by hovering your mouse over the Zoom screen, and then down toward the bottom in the middle of your screen, you should see a Q&A dialogue button. Click on that and you can submit the questions. So I will go through the questions, and our first few questions are actually for Richard and Mary. And you're all welcome to come off of mute and take these questions as they come. So Martha asks, and I think she noted that in the initial pictures, maybe in year 2, I think it was, there was a lot of stone that was visible on the shoreline that was kind of naked and visible. And then toward the end, one of your pictures, you couldn't see that stone. So did you remove that stone, or what's happened to that stone?
Well, as much as we could. Unfortunately, literally just the year before this older fellow, the previous owner, sold to us, largely because he had that cultivated lawn, he had an erosion control problem, and he hired somebody to come out and put in a significant riprap installation along the shore. Not all 310 feet, but probably about half of it. And frankly, I was dismayed. I mean, I'm not, riprap has a place in terms of hierarchy of erosion control solutions. But ironically, given what we chose to do with that parcel later, in terms of regrading to a natural slope and all the native plantings with deep, deep roots, erosion control is no longer an issue for us. And the riprap is, not my favorite thing. What you saw in that one photo is that right behind the dock, I was so dismayed by the riprap that we enlisted all sorts of relatives and friends to come and create a human chain and literally remove about 25 feet of that riprap. But that took a couple of years. I mean, that riprap is so dense and was so over-engineered that we quit after about 25 feet. The rest of it now, frankly, is so covered over by other native plantings and vines and the transition into the littoral zone of the lake itself. It's not very visible, and for that we're relieved.
Yeah, and that's a common technique too that people will often use, is to plant willows or other trees and bushes and plants into that riprap or natural stone that then allows the plants to revegetate while you have some of that interim protection when you have strong wave energy. So, all right, great answer. Next question: did you guys have any deer to deal with, or did you, or other wildlife, maybe geese eating your plants, those sorts of things? How did you manage those?
We really don't see a lot of deer where we live, although they do like to graze in the vegetable garden, but they don't graze in the native lakescape. We've had
Beavers have been a problem. We had a lot of quaking aspen that we planted, about 4 or 5 feet tall that are now really mature and robust, but beavers took out quite a few of those trees, as beavers will. And we've since remedied that by running a couple of rounds of chicken wire around the bottom to kind of thwart their ability to get in with those teeth. But deer, I'd say no, they've been a non-factor.
And we don't have geese. They do not come up into the yard. But do we have sand cranes?
Well, yeah, sandhill cranes.
Sandhill cranes, but they just came up and walked across the street. They didn't eat anything. So it's pretty much, there's no issue with critters at all.
Other than the beavers, yeah.
We have lots of bees and lots of butterflies and lots of dragonflies, and those are the critters we want in the yard. So
You mentioned that you guys have been doing a lot of tours on your property for busloads of people, as I recall. What are some of the common misconceptions that you hear from them that you might dispel?
Well, one would be that it's a lot of work. And we do concede readily up front that the first couple of years after you install a native buffer zone, it is a lot of work. And we alluded to that earlier in terms of, weed management early on. The weeds, it takes a while for the desirable native plantings to really, get their roots down there. But frankly, as you get on, I mean, where we are now at year 17, 18, there's relatively little management we have to do, other than the fact that we do a dormant mow most spring to kind of cut down all the flotsam and enable a regrowth. And then every 5 years or so, we do a controlled burn, which we will do again this year. So that's one of the misconceptions. Another, frankly, is a lot of people just think it looks like an unmowed yard. I had one neighbor who was trying to place me at a point, and he finally goes, "Well, you're that lazy son of a gun that doesn't mow his yard." I kind of laughed, and I said, "Well, I'd invite you to come down and actually take a closer look at what this native prairie looks like." And because often there's a misconception that it's just random and ugly. I know, I'm sure you've seen stories in more metropolitan areas. People who are trying to get away from, cultivated lawns, mowed lawns, are running headlong into problems with the government
for the HOAs
and their neighbors saying, this is really ugly. So that's probably the most common misconception we encounter, that it's not beautiful until you get up close to it and really can see otherwise.
All right, thanks. And I do apologize for misplacing you in South Dakota in my introduction.
We love South Dakota too.
Okay. Let's see. There were some questions, and I think this one's for Nate. initially there was some folks that were a little bit confused about what a conservation easement is in general. And so I think you answered it as you went through it. So Nate, maybe I'll offer a brief definition for a conservation easement, and you can add to it. So my understanding of conservation easement is that it's a legal agreement between a property owner and an organization, typically a conservation organization, that gives some rights from that property to that organization, but allows the owner to continue owning the land and using it for whatever other purposes that they want. And that conservation organization then is buying some of that conservation value, in your case, the protection of the land, the agreement to not develop it or conduct unsustainable forestry, those sorts of things on it. Does that sound about right to you? And do you have any other pieces you'd want to add?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's I would just add maybe some analogy to a conservation easement is so when you own land, you own, with that ownership comes a whole lot of rights of what you can do with that property. And when I work with the land trust, we'd describe it as like, if you imagine like a whole bundle of straws or something in your hand, and each one of those straws represents something you can do on your land, whether it's subdivide it, do commercial agriculture on it, commercial forestry, you can do subdivisions, you can sell parts of it, you can build a building, everything, all these different things you can do with land on it, treat it however you want, you can mine it, you can pave it, you can do all sorts of things. And what that conservation easement is doing is you're working with a qualified organization to say, you know what, we want to sever some of those rights and hand them over for you to look after, so that you kind of agree that, yep, though for us it was some of the rights of the clear cutting forestry, of subdividing, of the amount of development, the amount of impervious surface that could happen in there. You know, those are so important to us that we want to have a qualified conservation organization in charge of those rights, in case some generations from now, or we can sell our property if we want to. But even if my family decides to sell the property, those rights of subdivision, of development, of clear cutting, of all those things remain with Northwoods Land Trust. And they're in charge of protecting those conservation values. We can do whatever we want of whatever rights we've retained aside from that conservation easement. And that's what that easement is it's the severing of those different rights of the property and handing them over to a qualified conservation organization. And those can be purchased or they can be donated. And if they're donated, there's actually often financial tax benefits for that, federal tax benefits if you're donating conservation value. My family chose not to take advantage of that, but most private owners, landowners, if they're donating those developmental, the rights to split and divide, you can actually get really substantial tax benefits for doing them. I will also say, for our family, that doesn't exempt us too from state regulations. There's certain wetland protections and setbacks to the lake that the easement basically just reinforces those pre-existing state regulations.
Thanks. I want to kind of loop back to another question for the Galleys. And so this person would love to undertake a project like the one that you did at their house on Inland Lake in eastern northern Michigan. So is there a typical cost range that they should expect if they're going to embark on this sort of a project?
Boy, it's really hard to pin that down. I've had an opportunity through my volunteer work with the Lake Association, and there's about 1,300 parcels around this chain of lakes. So I've looked at dozens, and some can be as modest as $3,000. If somebody doesn't need to do regrading, they're just, basically killing off or suppressing turf and replanting selectively some native wildflowers or grasses. Others, again, like ours, where we had to pull out the retaining wall and dispose of it And of course, depending upon the size of the parcel, ours was 25,000 roughly. I've seen some that are, there's an erosion control project going on upstream of the chain I'm on. It's a dammed river system, and it's 250,000, although that's across several parcels with 90% funding from state resources. So there's no hard and fast rule of thumb that I can offer. There are great resources for anybody that's thinking about it. I would start at your county level, at least based on our experience in Minnesota. We use the Soil and Water Conservation District, which has an amazing professional team that can come out and analyze your options, draw up plans, work, very closely with you. There are private companies that, specialize in that you can, and contractors that have a lot of experience. So there's a lot of resources available depending upon where you live, and the costs can vary, particularly if there are some subsidies available as they were for us.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think you're spot on there. The costs can range pretty broadly, and I will note that typically restoring your natural shoreline using a bioengineering approach, it can be cheaper than using the hard shoreline armoring approaches, installing a seawall, driving pile, that sort of stuff. So it is definitely an option that should be considered. We have a number of questions. I do want to, there are a couple that are sort of along the same theme. So I want to just point folks to resources. If you go to the Shoreline Living documents, at the end of those documents, there's a page that shows resources for bioengineering and natural shorelines in all of the states in the Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership footprint. So whether in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan, there are resources, good starting points if you're interested in doing this yourself or starting a program like this. Here in Michigan, it's the Natural Shoreline Partnership. And I'll also note that, of course, there's permitting needs. So if you're considering doing work on your shoreline, you should be talking with your local permitting staff, whether those are the state or county, any relevant permitting that you have to do. So make sure to keep that in mind as well. And I see Erin's got pulled up here the last page that shows the example for the resources. So there's a lot of resources you can take advantage of. Our goal with the Shoreline Living document is to inspire people to want to do this. And there are a lot of materials out there that can show you how to do it, folks that are willing to help you to start this journey and provide advice along the way. So with that, I think we're at 3:02 now, and so I want to close down our webinar for today. A huge thank you to Richard and Mary, to Nate and Erin for presenting, telling us about your properties and the great work that you've done. I think you guys are really wonderful stewards and examples of, how folks can use their properties for their own enjoyment, but also to help preserve the quality of the lake, which of course contributes to your enjoyment. So it's selfish too. So thank you all. And with that, I'm going to wrap us up. Our next webinar is on May 9th, Conservationist Perspective of Governance in the Inland Iowa Great Lakes. So these are inland lakes in Iowa. Austin Holland will be presenting. That's on May 9th, and you can register for that on our website. I will remind folks that if you would like to share this video, or if you want to rewatch it, you can do so in the archives on our webinar page, and I'll be emailing a link to that in about a week or so once we get the video posted and transcribed from this webinar. So again, a huge thank you to our presenters, and to our participants. Thank you for all you do for inland lakes. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.